Dr. Justin Frank, MD, the psychoanalyst, psychiatrist, clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral science at George Washington University, the author of multiple on-the-couch books, including Trump on the Couch, Obama on the Couch, Bush on the Couch. His Twitter handle is Justin Frank, MD. And Dr. Justin Frank, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we've talked. I'm curious your take on last night's or yesterday afternoon's hate rally in New York, where I believe you live, or at least in that area. Or actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're in D.C. But you know, what are your thoughts on that? What does this tell us about the mind of Donald Trump and his followers?
Well, I think the rally follows right on the heels of what you were just reading, which was about the belief in witchcraft. And I think there's a definite link in a way because actually Trump and the Madison Square Garden rally has a lot of magical thinking and a lot of belief in his lies and all kinds of unnatural things. And people are very willing to believe those things. And I think that it was a very powerful rally in that sense. It disturbed me because of a couple of things. One is that actually I feel sort of sad about it, which is that it has to do with how seriously our political life has declined and diminished over the years, where there's so much name-calling, so much magical thinking, so much divisiveness. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, there were lots of chants when I was during the Vietnam War when people would say, America, love it or leave it. And then a group of us would say, America, change it or lose it. But there's nothing like this. Yeah. And the second thing is that that his dementia and his deterioration is such that I think it leads to what's called frontal release, that he's able to say things impulsively and quickly without thinking about them clearly. And he says things that a lot of other people never would say and were never comfortable to say.
Are you talking about like his discussion of the size of Arnold Palmer's penis?
Yeah, his jug, and also about the boat sinking and the batteries, all kinds of things. But even the lashing out by just calling people fascists and calling Kamala Harris dumb and making all kinds of comments that people don't say in the political world until now. People never did that kind of thing. Even Goldwater didn't. LBJ didn't. I mean, people didn't do that. And Nixon didn't do it. So this is all new, and it's very destructive, and it's very impulsive. And I think that he is a man who is very comfortable being impulsive, and that his frontotemporal dementia, which is mild at this point, but it's definitely observable. What happens is you are able to say all kinds of things that you wouldn't ordinarily say in, shall we say, polite company, and certainly not in front of a television camera or in front of thousands.
In other words, his inhibitory, I'm mangling a word here, I'm sorry. His inhibition, the network in his brain that controls inhibition is not functioning properly. Is that what you're saying?
It's compromised, right. It's called frontal release. The frontal lobes are no longer blocked as much by the parietal lobes, or by the part of the brain that involves your superego, your ability to control your feelings, to not have to reveal them all the time, to learn to keep your mouth shut. Little children should be seen and not heard. That's what adults do to try to train children to not speak out their impulsive thoughts. I mean, there's more than that, but Trump is actually speaking out his impulsive thoughts, and it's part of his mental decline. It brings part of his actual power, because a lot of people are relieved when he says what they're thinking. And a lot of people have these thoughts that they don't say, and suddenly they feel that somebody knows what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of aggression and a lot of anger.
And a lot of racism and a lot of anti-Semitism.
A lot of racism and sexism. There's misogyny and racism that are very powerful. I agree.
So last night, for 2 hours before Trump spoke, there was this long line of people who got up and said wonderful things about him. And I don't know if Mike Johnson spoke or not, but he was there last night. You had the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, wearing a hat that said, Make America Great Again, in the same script, the same typeface that Adolf Hitler used for the cover of his book Mein Kampf, or a very similar one, that old German kind of super serif, font. And, what does this say about them? I mean, we've got this observable, narcissism with Donald Trump and other, psychological pathologies. But what about the guys who are, I realize some of them are just opportunists. Elon Musk doesn't want to be regulated, doesn't want to pay taxes, wants big government contracts. He'll make many more billions if Trump becomes president than he would otherwise. But although, he also grew up in apartheid South Africa, I'm just curious your thoughts on what this says about the people who preceded him, Tucker Carlson.
I'll frame my thoughts by the very first thing you said just now, which is Elon Musk doesn't want to be regulated. I think that's the key. Mm-hmm. And I think that what we're seeing from those first 2 hours is people who Trump has given permission to not be regulated, that it's really okay not to be regulated, and you can just say what you want and nothing bad is going to happen to you. There are certain internal guardrails that people talk about that you can just walk around and say whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And especially what's unleashed is a comfort to be able to express your hatred, as you said, your racism, your sexism, and all of these things. And then the people on TV afterwards, like on MSNBC, were commenting about them and talked about them as, those weren't jokes. Those were racial slurs. I mean, to even call them jokes is bothersome to me. Even attempted jokes, they're not jokes. They're serious racial slurs and demeaning of other people. And what it does is it dehumanizes people to the extent that no longer are illegal immigrants, which is a bad enough term, human beings. They're actually being dehumanized. And that's one of the things that gives Trump his strength also, that we don't have, because when you dehumanize people, you don't have to feel guilt about deporting them. You have to feel guilt about locking them up because they're not really human.
Right.
So you're free and you can triumph over guilt and let your hatred just run wild.
So it sounds like what you're describing here are psychopaths or sociopaths, in both the case of Trump and many of these people who are supporting him, or at least people who are, so low in the level of conscience that they may have that they're willing to set it aside for their own greed. What does this say about the followers, the 20,000 people that packed into that arena last night?
I think that book you were reading from, I think a lot of people do want to. There are two things. One is people are really attracted to a leader who feels like he can take charge and who acts like an alpha male, and he can say all the things, as I said before, that they're afraid to say, talk about the hatred of things. I think at a second level, all of us, you and me included, were once children, and we certainly had feelings as children of anger at parents, feeling intimidated by them, feeling not wanting to have to do our homework or make our beds or whatever it was that we couldn't do or watch ourselves. And I think he can tap into that deep part of resentment that's buried in most of us, or socialized in most of us, so we're able to think about those things without having to suddenly be full of rage, unless we're like watching a boxing match or a football game, which allows us to say these things. And Trump really allows people to say these things. But the second thing that is appealing, I think, to the 20,000 people is an unconscious drive that exists in all of us also, but it's more pronounced when Trump emphasizes it. And that is the attraction to non-thought. Not enough people talk about this as a primary drive in people, but we want to turn things into categories. We want to be able to understand in order to label and make things clear. So you see one person, that's this person, you know, I still remember coming home when one of my children was watching some show on TV, and I asked them, how is it going with Susie, or it was a character that Judy Garland was playing, and my daughter said, well, she's very good, but she doesn't know she's really Judy Garland. And I really think that the capacity to suspend disbelief was very funny, but it's really what happens in these crowds, and it happens in large groups. They believe in magical thinking, and there's a deep attraction to non-thought, and it has to do with not having to do the work of thinking. The other thing that Trump taps into, which I think applies to large groups, is what I call a defensive use of contempt. If we dehumanize illegals, if we dehumanize the opposition party like Kamala and other people, we don't have to really feel guilt about them. We don't have to think about them, and we have contempt about them. And why it's defensive is that when you can really feel a lot of contempt, you don't have to look at your own inadequacies, your own fears of what you can and can't do, and your own accomplishments in life. And he really taps into that in a way that I haven't ever seen anybody in this country ever do.
I get it. It's amazing. Dr. Justin Frank, author of Trump on the Couch, and Justin Frank, MD, over on Twitter. Dr. Frank, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you.
Always great talking to you. We'll be back 18 minutes past the hour.